Alright, it's time for another sci-fi fantasy and weird fiction title with Herland by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Hey everyone, it is Shannon, and I'm continuing my sci-fi fantasy and weird fiction exploration, and this time I picked Herland. It is a utopic feminist science fiction novel. That's how it's classified. I have that the date is 1915. It was written in newspapers, magazines, like in series, and but a bound edition didn't come out till the late 70s. So, and it actually is public domain, and I will leave the link below if you want to check it out over at Project Gutenberg. So here we go. Herland. So that's the statistical analysis, and it's funny. We'll get into the what genre is it in a little bit later, but I did pick it because it's feminist science fiction. I was like, yep. And I did want to go, I'm trying to bounce back and forth between newer titles and older titles and alternate between men and women authors. And this was the earliest woman author on the Sci-Fi Fantasy Weird list at all. So, and I was like, how had I not heard of this science fiction book from 1915 written by a woman? How had I not heard that? So, but what it's about is it actually follows three guys, three who hear about a land or a place that is populated only by women, as you can tell kind of by the title, Herland. And they want to go. They want to go, and so they adventure out to this place, and it's centered on what happens mainly when they get there. So and what it's really about is it's more of a sociological social commentary, and to me it kind of felt like it was actually a direct way to tell men that women can do whatever they want in a lot of ways. Like it was showing a community of women being just fine doing their own thing and not needing men. But it's weird because it's from the perspective of three guys, so there are a lot of surprises from that perspective, and it is pretty clear to me that it's social commentary. So what there's lots that I liked about it, including the fact that it made me think a fair amount. Because it was theory heavy, and it was talking about society and societal structures and what works and what doesn't, and presenting new ideas and different ideas and challenging ideas of that day, which is now 100 years ago. And it's kind of weird. Like it's really, I think, important to see how far we've come in terms of equality, but I also think it's a little sad to see that some roles really are still relegated in terms of gender, and so that's really crazy. There are some things that really I found really challenging in terms of like the perception of women not getting along with each other, that women together can't not fight. They're gonna fuss about, basically, and almost always the perspective. This is coming from the guy's perspective, and so, which provides sort of the tone of society of the time, and it has this sort of like all the women will flit and flounder and try and gain the attentions of men, and therefore fight between themselves. So, because that's the only thing that's important. Right. What didn't work for me is that it was pretty, it was pretty theory heavy. It was pretty talking directly to you. A lot of it was preaching to the choir, like I believe in equality, always have. So I don't need to be convinced. And it was pretty dry. I think that's because the main character, Van Dyke, is a sociology student. I don't remember. Wikipedia says he's a student. I thought he was a sociologist. I don't like the Wikipedia page, to be honest. It's not very impartial. Anyway, but so he's the protagonist, and he's talking to us and writing down what's happened in Herland while they were there in Herland, and it's very directly like, this chapter I'm going to talk to you about, these different parts of the culture. And so for me that felt a little dry, but I can understand, especially if it was released in chapters and sections, I can understand why they did that. But for me, it made it really dry. And also, I found it a little challenging that the three characters, Van, Terry, and Jeff, are very one-dimensional archetypes of not Van so much, but they are very much in terms of the spectrum of Terry is a total manly man, misogynist, and Jeff is, really open and loves women in a different way. Terry loves men, but he wants them all to fall in love with him, and a lot of his personal identity comes from being, the guy, the swooner, and then Van's right in the middle where he sort of sees from both sides and is a bit more, reasonable. And so for me, one of the things that didn't quite work on this is that it's very direct, that, Terry is the most antagonistic, and, Jeff is the most sort of meek, and in the world, regular society where they come from, Terry is really successful, Jeff is kind of successful, and Van is like, okay, does well for himself in terms of life and in terms of their success with women. And then when they go to Herland, it's kind of the reverse. Terry does not fit in well. Jeff fits in great, and Van is kind of in the middle. So for me, it was so direct, that it felt kind of like a study with the three most perfect specimens for a study. But I can understand that clarity is part of what they're trying to get across, but it didn't, in terms of engagement as a reader, it was a little, you kind of always knew what was going to happen in each scenario. So it was actually, to be honest, it was very different than I expected. It was drier than I expected and more sort of, as I said, feels kind of like an experiment. And that's actually totally valid for the story. It's totally valid. But I wasn't expecting it to be from a male perspective. I really thought, this land of all women, that we'd hear from the women's perspective, but we don't. We only hear from them through the men. And I would have loved to sort of read a diary from someone who lived there, one of the women who lived there. I thought that would be an interesting, element or something like that. And even there's not tons of dialogue because it's written in this style of reflection. I'm going to tell you a story, not my favorite. As this will come up with a lot of the older titles, I think. Yeah, it has this, I'm going to tell you a story. This is what happened. This is what happened about this. This is what happened about that. So, it's in the future. It's not in the present. It's a reflection. So you're getting everything from Van's perspective. So I really did want more time with the women, and there wasn't too much that I wanted less of. I thought less. I actually, the structure of it being about sort of one particular topic per chapter didn't really strike me, as great. It'd be great for a class, like if you followed along the chapters in a class or as a discussion, it'd be perfect. Like, it gives you so much to think about, and it challenges a lot. So I really appreciated that. In terms of it being the science fiction, to me, I don't actually consider this science fiction. I do consider it feminist fiction, and it does present a utopia. Whether or not that utopia is a science fiction utopia or a fantasy utopia, or utopia doesn't have to be defined by a further genre, that's another question. That's a sort of a spoiler zone question. And I'll try and address that there. I would say that it is an essential title. I am glad that it's on this list. I am surprised that I only came across it in one syllabus. And because I do think it's essential. Will it appeal to all science fiction fans? I don't know. I think if you like social commentary in terms of science fiction, I think this is a really, really good pick for sure, without question. One of the strangest things about this one is that it is the second book in a trilogy, but it's sort of the book that is noted. I didn't read the first one, and I don't know if I'll read the third. I'm happy going in here, it feels like a standalone story. It has, again, like a lot of the older titles, it has sort of like an adventure spirit. They arrive, there are challenges to come across. How are they going to deal with these challenges? You know, and that's the adventure. Although, one of my favorite quotes from the book is actually from Terry, the guy that's a jerk, and he talks about how there's no adventure because there's no conflict. And that really made me think about, you know, adventure. And if that's the case, if you can have an adventure without conflict, or or could you change the word conflict, but also the desire for conflict, because his character was very bored in Herland, because he wanted, you know, he wanted conflict. That was a self-identity type thing. So it's interesting in terms of personal identity, individualism, community, had lots of interesting to say. So I definitely really appreciated it. Now I rated it a 4 on Goodreads. It has a pretty low rating. It's like, but all older titles do, 3.44. I gave it a 4 or an 8.5. Out of 10, and I really enjoyed it. I definitely recommend it for people who like social commentary, any books on social commentary, any books on feminism. It's a little direct, but I think it's definitely worth it. So wow, I gotta say, it was hilarious to be reading this when the Wonder Woman trailer dropped, because there definitely feels like there is a connection. Big time, big time. I don't know if it was influential to the creation of Wonder Woman, but it was very strange to be reading it when that came out. What I'm going to be reading next is, what am I going to be talking about next? Mistborn. Mistborn is the next book. I only have a couple moments for the spoiler zone, so if you haven't read the book, this is the time to say bye-bye. And what did I have for spoiler zone questions? What was it? I was curious mostly if people had heard of the book, and if they had read the other books in the series, and how they felt about the three characters and how very clear their roles are, and also the whole like immaculate conception thing, like women just being able to give birth by themselves. Like, talk about like like just that's where the genre thing kind of freaks me out, because it's not explained, which means in my mind it's fantasy. They don't explain it through science, therefore it makes it fantasy. So maybe it's just utopic and you don't go further in terms of genre. But I was actually very surprised at how centered it was on not mothering, but rearing, child rearing, bringing kids into the world, and how, because right now when I think of feminism, I think of a lot of that as being at choice and may or may not having kids, whereas in Herland, everyone has kids. All women have a kid, but it's an individual entity, and their sense of family is the entire community, not a mother to daughter relationship. That's a special relationship. They all have a special relationship. That was fascinating. And I think that blew my mind more than everything else in the book. So, but overall, I thought it was a great choice. I'd love to hear if anyone's read the first or third book and their thoughts on that. And I'm a little leery of the third book, because like, it's definitely, you know, one of the women from Herland leaving, and I'm just like, I can't imagine that being a positive experience. So anyway, that was Herland. This one was long. Sorry about that. Thanks for watching.